In the final days of World War II, as Nazi Germany collapsed under the weight of its own brutality, chaos reigned across Europe. The Red Army pushed in from the east. The Americans and British advanced from the west. Berlin, once the seat of the Reich, was reduced to rubble. Hitler was hidden in a bunker. Whole divisions vanished, deserting or surrendering by the hour. But not everything fled to the front lines. Far from the battlefields, in the mountains of southern Germany and western Austria, another kind of operation was underway, quiet, deliberate, and cloaked in secrecy. Somewhere between Bavaria and the Austrian Alps, in the final weeks of the war, a convoy of vehicles left an SS-controlled facility under heavy guard. According to post-war Allied intelligence reports and testimony from local villagers, the trucks carried a mix of crates, wooden, metal reinforced, marked with German military codes. Some bore the insignia of the Reichsbank, others that of the SS. What was inside has never been confirmed. But here's what we do know. By April 1945, the Nazis had plundered an immense amount of wealth. Gold reserves from occupied countries, stolen art, jewelry, and currency taken from private citizens, particularly Jewish families deported or murdered during the Holocaust. By conservative estimates, billions in assets had been seized. Some of that was recovered after the war, hidden in salt mines or abandoned in retreat. Some wasn't. The convoy that left Bavaria, one of several reported in the final weeks of the war, was never intercepted by Allied forces. No records indicate where it was headed. No bodies were found. No cargo was officially recovered. The trail ends in the Alps. What happened next remains one of the most enduring, unsolved puzzles of the Second World War. The story has inspired speculation, sensational books, and even covert expeditions. But at its core is a simple, stubborn fact. A large quantity of stolen Nazi treasure went missing at the war's end. And one convoy, in particular, seems to have disappeared entirely. Over the next hour, we'll strip away the fiction and focus on the historical record. We'll follow the money, how it was looted, where it was stored, and what efforts were made to hide it as the Reich collapsed. We'll examine credible sightings, declassified intelligence, and the recovery missions that followed. Because for all the stories that have been told, the real mystery isn't whether the Nazis hid gold in the mountains. It's why, after 80 years, that gold has never been found. And what that absence continues to reveal. Not just about the treasure, but about the final days of a regime built on theft, terror, and silence. The story of the lost convoy begins long before the war's final days. It starts with the machinery of organized theft, the Nazi plunder machine, one of the most extensive campaigns of economic looting in modern history. From 1939 onward, as the German military swept across Europe, the Nazis implemented a policy of systematic asset seizure in every occupied country. It wasn't just the chaos of war. It was deliberate, bureaucratic, and executed with chilling efficiency. The Reichsbank, under Walter Funk, served as the central organ in this system. Alongside it operated the SS, particularly the Einsatzgruppen, special task forces assigned to confiscate valuables from Jews and political targets. But the most specialized looters were the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, or ERR, led by Alfred Rosenberg. Their mission: to strip cultural and financial wealth from Europe's cities. They began with the banks. Nazi forces seized national gold reserves from countries like Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. In 1940, the French central bank lost more than 2,500 metric tons of gold, transferred to Berlin through intermediary accounts, or simply loaded onto German trains. The Netherlands lost over 1,300 tons. These reserves were melted down, recast with Nazi insignias, and integrated into Germany's wartime economy. Next came private property. Jewish homes, businesses, and personal bank accounts were looted under a policy called Aryanization. Wealthy Jewish families in Austria, France, Hungary, and Poland saw their assets frozen, seized, and reallocated. The SS profited directly, confiscating art collections, fine jewelry, and antiques. The contents of safety deposit boxes were opened and taken without record. Then came the bodies. In the extermination camps, the SS stripped prisoners of everything: rings, watches, coins, and dental gold. The victims were processed, their valuables logged, and the materials sent back to the Reichsbank. Nazi records later recovered by the Allies showed inventories down to the gram. The magnitude is staggering. Estimates suggest the Nazis seized the equivalent of over $20 billion in today's currency. Some of it banked in Swiss accounts, some of it laundered through neutral countries, and much of it physically transported to secure locations in Germany and Austria. Art theft, too, played a central role. The ERR cataloged over 21,000 stolen artworks. Museums across Europe lost masterworks by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Monet, and Klimt. Entire galleries were emptied. Some works funneled to Hitler's planned Führer Museum in Linz, others hoarded by high-ranking officers. But as 1944 turned to 1945, the Reich's priorities shifted. With the Allies approaching, Nazi leadership began relocating their hoarded wealth. The Nero Decree, an order to destroy infrastructure and assets, was issued by Hitler, but resisted by some officers. Instead, orders were quietly given to hide treasure, not destroy it. Convoys were organized. Mines, caves, and lakes in Austria and Bavaria were identified as potential vaults. This was not fantasy. It was documented. The Merkers salt mine in central Germany, discovered by U.S. forces in April 1945, held over 100 tons of gold bars, 400 tons of currency, and priceless art. In Altos, Austria, another salt mine hid thousands of paintings, including works by Michelangelo and Da Vinci. Both sites were uncovered only because local informants came forward. Many other caches were never found, and many convoys, like the one that vanished into the Alps, were never recovered. By April 1945, the Nazi plunder machine had turned inward. Looted wealth was no longer used to fund the war. It was now about personal escape, bargaining power, and survival. Convoys were dispatched under cover of night. No longer headed for Berlin, they moved south, toward the mountains, toward what many hoped would be a last bastion of defense, or at least a place to disappear. Some of that treasure made it into Allied hands. Some of it was buried and later recovered. But some, perhaps billions in stolen wealth, simply vanished. And that's where the real story begins. By early 1945, the Third Reich was disintegrating. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army advanced relentlessly through Poland and into Eastern Germany. Soviet soldiers had already uncovered the horrors of Majdanek and Auschwitz. On the Western Front, American, British, and French forces crossed the Rhine and pushed deep into the German heartland. Within the Nazi high command, panic set in. Hitler, increasingly isolated and paranoid, issued contradictory orders from his Berlin bunker. His so-called Nero Decree, signed in March 1945, demanded the destruction of German infrastructure, bridges, factories, railroads, anything that could fall into enemy hands. But many commanders, recognizing the inevitability of defeat, chose instead to disobey. They focused not on destruction, but on preservation, or in some cases, concealment. This period, March to early May 1945, was a logistical free-for-all. Train schedules collapsed. Roads were jammed with refugees, wounded soldiers, and convoys of SS and Wehrmacht units retreating toward the Alps. Among these were convoys not carrying troops, but treasure. Multiple sources, including post-war interrogations and U.S. intelligence reports, indicate that during these final weeks, Nazi officials began transferring remaining gold reserves, stolen artworks, and other valuables to remote areas in southern Germany and western Austria. The rationale was twofold: hide evidence of plunder and prepare for the rumored Alpine redoubt, Alpenfestung. The Alpenfestung was envisioned as a fortified last stand in the Bavarian and Austrian Alps. Though never fully realized, it existed as a serious concept within Nazi planning circles. The terrain favored defense, and the region was home to Hitler's mountain retreat, the Berghof, and other elite Nazi compounds. It was also dotted with salt mines, tunnels, and deep alpine lakes, ideal locations for concealment. Among the confirmed movements was a transport operation near Berchtesgaden, where American forces later recovered stolen artwork and documents. Another, more mysterious, is the convoy believed to have departed from the Munich area in early April 1945, possibly routed through Garmisch-Partenkirchen or Innsbruck into the Austrian Tyrol. This convoy appears in fragments across multiple testimonies. In one report collected by the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, a German prisoner of war stated that he had guarded a transport of trucks marked with Reichsbank insignia. The convoy traveled under SS escort, made brief stops at abandoned facilities, and was last seen headed toward the Salzkammergut region, home to vast cave networks and mines. Another U.S. Army report from May 1945 noted civilian witnesses in Austrian villages who described seeing military trucks and unmarked crates moved under cover of night. The vehicles reportedly entered a forested region near Lake Toplitz, long rumored to be a Nazi dumping ground. But beyond these vague references, the paper trail ends. No intercepted communications mention a final destination. No captured officers admitted responsibility. No complete inventory has ever been recovered from that convoy. And therein lies the mystery. Unlike the treasures found in Merkers or Altusay, recovered due to insider tips, this convoy was never claimed, never located, and never traced after the war. It simply disappeared into the chaos of Germany's last days, during a time when command structures were collapsing and secrecy was paramount. To this day, no reliable record confirms what was in those trucks, only that they were seen, they were guarded, and they were never found. And in the smoke and rubble of a dying regime, silence became the last surviving witness. With the war over and the Allied occupation of Germany and Austria underway, attention quickly turned to what had not been found. Victory brought not just liberation, but inventories. U.S. and British intelligence teams, working alongside Monuments men and financial investigators, began assembling lists of missing cultural treasures and looted wealth. What emerged was staggering. Not only had the Nazis looted billions in gold and currency, but entire collections of art and state valuables remained unaccounted for. And then came the rumors. In U.S. military archives, particularly the files of the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, and the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, scattered references appear to an SS convoy that departed southern Germany in April 1945 and vanished into Austria. Unlike the documented recoveries at the Merker salt mine or Alto See, this operation remains murky, recorded only in pieces through interviews, patrol reports, and after-action summaries. One of the most consistent threads comes from the Salzkammergut region of Austria. In May 1945, shortly after German surrender, local villagers in towns such as Bad Ischl, Bad Aussee, and Ebensee told U.S. soldiers about late-night movements of military trucks in the previous month. These convoys, according to witnesses, traveled on restricted roads, escorted by SS troops, and often stopped near caves or forest clearings. A 1946 report compiled by CIC officer Major William B. Smith noted several interviews with Austrian civilians describing wooden crates being offloaded near lakefronts and mountain caverns, especially near Lake Toplitz and surrounding lakes such as Grundlsee. Locals recalled that guards refused access and ordered nearby residents to stay indoors. Afterward, the vehicles were never seen again. Other leads came from captured Germans. In one interrogation transcript preserved in the U.S. National Archives, an SS non-commissioned officer stated under questioning that, in early April 1945, he was assigned to a convoy transporting sensitive financial materials from Munich toward a secure location in the Alps. When pressed for specifics, he claimed the operation was compartmentalized. He knew only that the cargo was handled by Reichsbank personnel, and that only officers knew the final destination. What adds credibility to these fragments is the precedent. Treasure was indeed hidden in this way. At Alto See, a salt mine concealed more than 6,500 paintings, sculptures, and cultural artifacts. Some were recovered due to intelligence from local resistance fighters and surrendering Wehrmacht officers. In central Germany, U.S. forces stumbled upon the Merkers mine cache, $250 million in gold bars, foreign currency, and Reichsbank records, because of a tip from two French women who had seen unusual activity there, but no such tip ever surfaced for the missing convoy in the Alps. Decades later, declassified documents shed further light. A 1953 internal memorandum from the U.S. Army's European Command listed known and suspected unrecovered Nazi caches. Among them was a convoy last seen in southern Bavaria on April 10, 1945, believed to be heading toward the Tyrolean border. The cargo was labeled finance sensitive, and the file included redacted sections related to civilian observations and ongoing international inquiries. In another report, from 1962, West German authorities reopened an investigation into stolen Reichsbank holdings based on information from a former SS officer who claimed the convoy had offloaded its cargo near Eisriesenwelt, a vast ice cave system south of Salzburg. The site was searched. Nothing found. No follow-up was ever published. Lake Toplitz, too, became a focus of intense speculation. Known for its depth and murky waters, the lake became infamous after the 1959 discovery of crates filled with counterfeit British currency, the remains of Operation Bernhard, a Nazi plan to destabilize the British economy with forged notes. Divers also found SS documents, weapons, and other military debris, but no gold. That discovery reignited global interest. Expeditions were launched. Journalists, treasure hunters, and even former intelligence agents explored the area. In the 1990s, sonar scans detected metallic anomalies at the lake's deepest point, beyond the reach of early diving teams. But no official excavation followed. To this day, the archival record tells us several things clearly. A convoy did leave southern Germany in April 1945. It likely carried Reichsbank-labeled cargo. Civilian and military witnesses placed it in Austria's mountainous terrain, and no comprehensive recovery of that specific cargo has ever been documented. What remains are scattered records, inconsistent testimonies, and decades of unanswered questions. And the simple fact that, while the Allies found much, they didn't find it all. In the wake of Germany's surrender in May 1945, Allied forces began the colossal task of rebuilding Europe, not just in infrastructure, but in truth. Central to this effort was the recovery of what the Nazis had taken. Under the direction of the U.S. Army and with British cooperation, specialized units were formed to locate and recover looted assets. Among the most notable were the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, commonly known as the Monuments Men, and the Allied Control Council's Finance Division, which focused on economic assets like gold, bonds, and currency. These teams had initial success. The Merkers salt mine discovery in central Germany yielded an extraordinary cache. Over 7,000 gold bars, foreign currencies, vast amounts of stolen jewelry, and detailed Reichsbank records. The operation was meticulously documented. Photographs, inventories, and transport logs remain preserved in U.S. archives. In Altaussee, Austria, tip-offs from local residents and captured Wehrmacht officers led to the uncovering of one of the largest stashes of stolen art in history. Buried deep within the mine's tunnels were works by Michelangelo, Rembrandt, Vermeer, and more, intended for Hitler's never-built Führer Museum. But these successes only deepened the question: what else had slipped through the cracks? That question drove the UST forces, specialized intelligence and recovery units, to conduct rapid assessments of German industrial and financial infrastructure. These teams interviewed German banking officials, SS officers, and civilians, trying to track the movements of gold and art that had not yet been found. And again, the same rumors surfaced. A convoy, SS-guarded, headed into the Alps, never recovered. U.S. reports from 1946 show that Lake Toplitz, Grundlsee, and Eisriesenwelt were specifically named by informants as potential dump sites. Yet none of these leads produced conclusive results. In 1947, the U.S. Army's Office of Military Government for Germany, OMGUS, compiled what became known as the Nazi Gold Report. It detailed the seizure, transfer, and known inventories of gold from occupied nations. But the report was incomplete. Some records, especially those concerning transfers in April 1945, remained missing or redacted. Internal memos expressed frustration over deliberate non-cooperation by former SS officials and the destruction of critical documents during the Reich's final collapse. As the Cold War set in, focus shifted. Soviet and Western occupation zones hardened into political fronts. Cooperation between Allied intelligence agencies became strained. Files were classified. Leads went cold. But in West Germany, private investigators and government archivists continued the search. In the 1950s and 60s, Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, West Germany's intelligence service, quietly investigated surviving SS networks suspected of having knowledge of hidden wartime assets. Some interviews hinted that smaller caches had been unearthed and smuggled out through Switzerland or Spain, possibly to fund post-war Nazi escape routes, known as rat lines. Meanwhile, adventurers, locals, and former soldiers began their own hunts. In 1963, a man named Fritz Huber claimed he had evidence of a buried cache in the Tyrolean Alps. His claim was investigated, and a limited excavation was conducted, but nothing was found. Similar stories echoed across southern Germany and Austria. By the 1980s, public interest in lost Nazi treasure surged again. Declassified documents fed television specials, books, and speculative expeditions. The Austrian government, responding to growing international pressure, allowed limited dives in Lake Toplitz. These yielded Operation Bernhard counterfeit currency, decayed ammunition, and SS file boxes, but still, no gold. In 2000, the U.S. Presidential Advisory Commission on Holocaust Assets released a comprehensive review of American efforts to recover stolen wartime property. It acknowledged that while much had been reclaimed, significant quantities of looted Nazi assets may remain undiscovered. The report listed Austria's mountain lakes and cave systems as credible potential sites of unrecovered wartime transfers. Throughout these decades, one pattern held. When a site was identified through official channels and investigated using reliable methodology, results followed. But when leads were based on hearsay, the trail usually ended in disappointment, or worse, exploitation. Despite this, some within military archival circles continued to believe that the 1945 convoy, or parts of it, remain hidden, either in remote alpine terrain or removed by insiders before Allied forces arrived. Today, small groups still search. They scan archival blueprints. They explore sealed tunnels and unexplored mine shafts. They dive into lakes with submersible drones and sonar arrays. Not in search of legend, but of closure. Because as history has shown, treasure wasn't just a symbol of Nazi power. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, technology finally caught up with the myth. For decades, searches for the lost Nazi convoy were limited by terrain, resources, and speculation. But by the early 2000s, new tools, satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, underwater sonar, and unmanned drones opened possibilities that earlier generations could only imagine. One of the most enduring focal points of modern exploration has been Lake Toplitz. Located deep in the Austrian Alps, Toplitz is a glacial lake, more than 100 meters deep, surrounded by cliffs and thick forest. Its unique underwater environment, fresh water atop a dense, salty lower layer, preserves submerged materials in near-perfect condition. But that same stratification makes diving operations difficult and dangerous. Modern expeditions have used remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, to scan the lake's bottom. In the 1990s and early 2000s, sonar mapping detected large metallic anomalies beneath layers of silt, objects too deep and obscured for divers to reach. Some speculate they are remnants of the lost convoy's cargo. Others believe they are wartime debris, fuel drums, munitions, or even intentional decoys. Despite media interest, no gold has ever been recovered from Toplitz. But some findings have reinforced the narrative. Crates of Operation Bernhard counterfeit currency, Nazi military documents, and rusted remnants of SS equipment. These discoveries prove the site was used by the Nazis, likely in the war's final days, as a dumping ground. Elsewhere in Austria and southern Germany, New investigations have targeted abandoned salt mines, caves, and tunnel systems. In the Dachstein Range and Höhlengebirge, cave explorers and historians have combined wartime aerial photos with GPS mapping to identify sealed entrances and mine shafts suspected of holding wartime cargo. In 2016, a private Austrian foundation, in cooperation with a university-led archaeology team, launched a non-invasive survey of mountainous terrain near Bad Aussee. Using LiDAR scanning, a laser-based mapping technique, they identified several unnatural depressions beneath forest canopy. Excavation permits were requested, but delayed due to environmental restrictions and the sensitive nature of war-era sites. Digital historians, too, are contributing. By analyzing declassified documents, wartime transport manifests, and post-war interviews, researchers have created interactive maps that track known movements of Nazi gold. These models attempt to triangulate the probable route of the missing convoy based on fuel range, SS checkpoints, and the status of mountain passes in April 1945. The picture that emerges is not one of fantasy, but of cold realism. In the Reich's final days, treasure was moved south. Some of it was found. Some of it was likely destroyed. But some, documented, witnessed, and never recovered, remains unaccounted for. And while today's searchers are fewer, they are better equipped, more informed, and, most importantly, more focused on facts than folklore. Because now, it's not just about gold, it's about history. And the unfinished story that still lies beneath the stones, ice, and silence of the Alps. More than 80 years have passed since the trucks disappeared. In that time, borders have changed, empires have fallen, Germany has rebuilt. And yet, somewhere in the high alpine passes of southern Bavaria and western Austria, a question still lingers in the silence. What happened to the last convoy? We've followed what the records tell us: the documented looting, the wartime logistics, the escape routes, the maps with gaps, the eyewitness accounts that point toward lakes, forests, and mines, but never quite to an answer. And maybe that's the point. This isn't just a story about missing gold. It's a story about how history leaves its scars, some visible, some buried, some still bleeding into the present. The physical treasure may never be found. If it was destroyed, moved abroad, or sealed away in a forgotten tunnel, we may never know. But what it represented, state-sanctioned theft on an unimaginable scale, remains undeniable. The Reich fell. Its leaders stood trial or died in disgrace. But the wealth they stole, much of it never accounted for, left a vacuum still felt in courtrooms, museums, and family estates across Europe. And that's what makes the lost convoy so enduring. It is a symbol of unfinished business, not just for treasure hunters, but for historians, archivists, and survivors. Every unanswered file, every sealed tunnel, every crate that wasn't cataloged. They all point to a greater truth. The final chapter of World War II didn't end with surrender. It ended with what was left behind and what was never recovered. In Austria, in Germany, in vaults and lakes and stone, something may still be waiting. Not because it wants to be found, but because someone, somewhere, believed it never would be. And until that silence is broken, the mountains will keep their secret, just as they always have. I've been through those parts of Europe, not looking for treasure, just stationed nearby years later, and I get why people keep asking about this story. It's not just about what the Nazis stole, it's about what they tried to erase, what still hasn't been found, what still matters. We may never find the convoy, but maybe what it left behind, questions, silence, unfinished history, is the real weight of it all. And maybe that's what keeps us looking. Thank you for watching, and let me know if you enjoyed this new format. As always, see you in the next one.